going on, Ty?
You ready?
Yeah, listen, I don't want to oversell it, but I do have my creative juices flowing today.
Nice.
So
awesome.
My daughter got this for me, and I'm pretty excited. So the caffeine kicks a little harder when you drink it from the creative juice mug.
Yep, absolutely. Mine's a little out of reach right now, so I'm just gonna have to weather the storm. I didn't think about that before I got set up, but I will say today's topic I think is going to be full of quotes, not just one or two. I think we're going to probably have a pretty good sized backpack full of quotes. So if you're listening, write down some of the names that you hear, because there will be some that you do know, and there may be some that you're not aware of. And we're probably going to pull from artists, fashion designers, writers, poets, art educators. I mean, I think we're going to be all over the board as we talk about one of my favorite subjects that at times can be quite controversial, depending on where you are in your art journey. And so we're going to go to Japan for our initial quote that's going to start our conversation. Are you ready to roll with that, Nathan?
Let's rock and roll. Yeah, all right. Fire away.
So this quote is coming from one of the world's most known fashion designers from Japan, Yohji Yamamoto. Part of my family is Japanese. My sister-in-law is from Tokyo, and she's in the fashion industry, so I know she'll be excited about this one. Yohji is a Japanese fashion designer in Tokyo and Paris, and he started out really as a master tailor alongside some very well-known tailors and fashion designers. And he's won multiple awards for his contributions to fashion. Born in Tokyo, graduated from Keio University with a degree in law, actually in 1966, gave up his legal career to help his mom in the dressmaking business. And I love this story. And that's where he learned how to be a tailor, basically. And then he further went on to study fashion design at Bunka Fashion College and got a degree in 1969. And this quote I've read in multiple books. Like they seem to kind of bounce around in multiple books. And this quote says, "Start copying what you love. Copy, 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 copy. And at the end of the copy, you will find yourself." And like I said, this is a controversial subject amongst artists. Stealing, copying, looking at lots of art. These things can create quite hefty conversations. How do you feel about this?
I'm for it. I'm pro stealing. I'm pro copying. Like, screw it. Just go for it. No, it's not quite that simple. But you've had a lot of conversations with young artists in your mentorship program, and I know this is something that you talk about a lot. So let's just maybe start with why. It's pretty obvious, but let's just break down why it's controversial, or what the two sides of the coin might be.
Well, no artist, right, wants to be labeled another artist, right? No, all artists want to be original and want to find originality within their work. And I think the goal of every artist is, can I discover something new? And you're probably not going to. There are new ideas in art. There are new things in art, but completely rediscovering something new, those are few and far between in the history of art, right? We know those names. We have their pictures on our wall, their quotes in our books. But when you want to be a great artist, you have got to steal and copy. That's practice. That's educating yourself, not just your brain, but also your technique, your gesture, your movement, how you paint. And we're all influenced by something. Our subconscious stores the things that we love in our head more and more. So even if you say, I will never copy, I will never steal, you are copying and you are stealing, because your subconscious is holding on to your observations and it's coming through in what you create. And what I'm saying, and what the quotes we're going to talk about today, is saying there's nothing wrong with that. That's how you go from being okay to good to great, from weak to strong.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny when you mention that, there's probably only one artist in the history of history who can actually claim originality. And that would be whichever cave, man or woman first, made the mark on the wall, who probably saw somebody draw with a stick in the sand, before that. But everything, from that point forward has been in some way inspired or influenced by something else or some other things. Yep. Right.
Well,
go ahead.
No, go for it. You go.
Well, what else do you like about, like, why, I know you love that quote. What else do you love about that? Like, break that down even, I think, a little bit further.
Well, we should all know where we want to be as an artist, but that takes time, right? If you are a landscape painter, right, or if you are a portrait painter, it's a little different than an abstract artist, but it's the same. Like, if you want to be good, how do the best portrait artists create their shadow and create their light? How are they utilizing color? Are they utilizing texture to create shadow and form and shape? Like, so you're going to go look at the greatest portrait artists in history, and you're going to see how they did this. Why did they do this? How does this work? How do these things work? Even if you're a landscape artist and you're painting plein air and looking at everything, you should still be going to the galleries and looking at the best landscape artists in history. Why did they do that? How did they do this? If you just go out and set up your canvas and just start painting, right, you're going to be able to paint, but you still have to learn. And that's why some artists go to art school. That's why some artists stay and get their MFAs and do those things. As an abstract artist, there are so many artists that I love, and I have this wonder of how in the world did Cy Twombly write the way he wrote on canvas, or how did he do the marks that he make? How did Joan Mitchell, build her gestures, or Bill de Kooning create those gestures in their work? And so you practice them because you love them and it does something to you, and you want your art to be or fit within that realm of those artists and how their work looks. And you have to practice. So what are you going to do? You're going to copy, right? Like Yohji says,
right,
or steal. I'm stealing the way that Cy makes his whatever. But here's the deal. This is what I love about the quote. At the end of the copy, you'll find yourself. At the end of it, you'll find yourself. Like, I just love that quote. And then Jeff Goins, the writer, has a book that is called, I have it right here, just so Real Artists Don't Starve. And there's a quote that he has in there where he says, "The best artists steal, but they do so elegantly, borrowing ideas from many sources and arranging them in new and interesting ways. You have to know your craft so well that you can build on the work of your predecessors, adding to the body of existing work." So you're stealing, but you're doing it elegantly. You're borrowing ideas, but you're rearranging those ideas in new ways, in interesting ways.
Yep.
I can't tell you how many times I've heard this and said it myself from art school graduates or MFA students. Not a lot of MFA students, but a lot of art grads for sure. Especially when you're young. I said it. I'm not looking at art. I'm not going to go look at any art because I want to be original. And I love this Cicero quote where it says, "To be ignorant of what occurred before you were born is to remain a child." If you want to mature, you better be studying what came before you. You better be looking. And if you really want to be mature, grab all those ideas and start to create you over time through all those ideas. Right? David Bowie, the only art I study is the art I can steal from. Quentin Tarantino, I've stolen from every movie ever made.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's a great one. I don't know. I've had a chance to listen to, he's a great interview. He loves the sound of his own voice. He's got interesting things to say. But when he talks about like his consumption of film and the encyclopedia he is, of different references is astounding. Right? So like, and his style is distinctive, to his own. Like, I don't think anyone's going to accuse him of, being, whatever derivative in a negative way. But because he's consumed so much and paid attention and studied, what he loves from different elements of film, that's what has, to the original quote, copying, just being influenced, absorbing, different ideas and different styles and different influences led him to what has become, one of the most distinctive and most copied, styles that there's ever been, right?
Well, and he gives it credit, right? Here's a difference.
Yeah.
The difference is the artist who steals and copies and claims it as completely their own ideas. Right? And it looks just like X, Y, and Z's work. Right? So that's where Jerry Saltz would say, copy, steal, keep trying, show it to a friend. If your friend tells you it looks just like somebody else's work, keep going. Bring it back to him again. If over time they're still saying it looks like somebody else's work, go find another thing to do. You just don't have it. Yeah. But I love but Quentin Tarantino, he gives it credit, right? Spaghetti westerns, the old kung fu films, Seven Samurai. Like he'll literally name, this is where I got this. This is where I got this. I think, I don't know if you've ever watched the side-to-side comparisons of Wes Anderson's influences and scenes in his films. It's magical.
No.
Peanuts. He was a huge Peanuts fan. So there's scenes in his films that are literally taken from Charles Schulz cartoons and represented within the scene. French films, a lot of French films. You can watch on YouTube side-by-side comparisons of his influences with certain scenes in his films, and he's given shout-outs, right?
Yeah.
You've influenced me. This I give shout-outs. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. My man, there's a lot of Psy in this work. And it came out because I've been reading all of his books, and so it's coming out in there. And I've had people, wow, that piece looks like a Cy Twombly piece. Oh, that piece looks like an Anthony Tapas piece. And I say, thank you so much for that. They're one of my heroes, and it definitely came out in my work, and I'm proud of it. So.
Right. Yep. Yeah. No, that's powerful. Wes Anderson, another great example of like a super distinctive signature style, but not, he didn't wake up one day and just it didn't just come out right out of nowhere. It was a product of what he had collected over time. All right, I'm going to throw one out. You're way ahead of me. So this is one of my favorite quotes on this subject, and this is a quote by Paul Schrader, who's a screenwriter, director. Worked with Scorsese on 4 different films, including Raging Bull, Taxi Driver, Last Temptation of Christ, American Gigolo. Most recently did the Card Counter. Have you seen that yet?
I haven't watched it yet, with Oscar Isaacs, right?
Is that who? Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah, and then First Reformed with Ethan Hawke from a couple years ago was another awesome one. But I didn't realize this until I did a little homework here. He's from Grand Rapids, Michigan, and graduated from Calvin College. So I'm pretty sure he's one of my people, one of my Dutch descendants settled in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So anyway, here's a quote. He said, and this is I'm not going to read the entire thing, but he references numerous films that had influenced. And this is an interview after First Reform came out. He said, "I was stealing all over the place. The secret of stealing is that you have to steal around. You can't go back to the same 7-Eleven every time. They catch you. So you go to the floral shop. Then you go to the gas station. Then you go to that hot dog stand that nobody goes to. And you keep grabbing this stuff, and eventually somebody will think you made it up."
Yep.
I just love that, right? So, I mean, it's just, you just think about, somebody who's literally going from store to store and trying to diversify their, where they're pulling things from. But I just love that. And that's actually from a podcast that I would recommend, The Moment with Brian Koppelman. Really good podcast. But that was an interview that he did back in May of 2018. So that whole interview is fantastic. But I love that quote because, you just think about, being diverse in your influences. I mean, this is going to be a common theme, right? Like if you pull from just, one thing, then it is kind of just like, that one thing. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, because you've talked about this, as well, but early in your art career where you were, hard and heavy on Basquiat, right?
Oh,
and how did that, so let me ask a better question. How did that sort of, evolve over time from, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but from what my understanding was, that was your predominant, or primary influence.
Yeah.
To now, however many years later, where it's a lot more diverse and you've stolen from more stores.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we didn't know who Basquiat was in the 90s. If you're in New York and you were in the art scene, you knew who Basquiat was. If you were in places where the art scene was big, you knew who Basquiat was. But he wasn't, Jean-Michel was not your Jackson Pollock name at the time in the 90s, right? Like in art school, we all knew who Jackson Pollock was. We didn't know who Basquiat was, and he wasn't talked about. Well, the wonderful film by Julian Schnabel about Basquiat came out, the narrative film, and it rocked my world, like completely rocked my world. I had no idea what Neo-expression is or was at that time. No clue. I didn't know who Julian Schnabel was. I didn't know who I didn't even know who the informalists were at that time. Like I had no idea. I knew abstract art, abstract expressionism, the things I loved. And they're the typical names that you would know, right? In abstract art or abstract expression. And I love Dadaism. I love surrealism, those things as a young, art student. And honestly, when I saw the film Basquiat, I don't know what happened to me. Like something inside about this person who I couldn't, at that time, I could not name a black artist if anybody asked me to. And that is horrible. And it wasn't just that I didn't know any black artists. They weren't being taught about. Nobody knew. Like nobody was teaching about any black artists at that time in art history books, right? Like this is terrible. And so, man, the film, the music, the story, how he was creating, what he was doing just did something to my soul. And I immediately started dressing like him, wearing sport coats, around. And I started dumpster diving and painting on wood and, building frames like stretchers like he did. Like I emulated him and I started writing around campus with chalk and markers. I started writing my own quotes, my Samo type quotes. And my favorite quote from the film or one of his old Samo graffiti pieces was Samo for president. Samo's political ideology, like all the things that he would write all over New York with his buddy Al Diaz. And I started writing things and making up my own quotes. Art is an oven at 450 degrees in 15 minutes, like making up my own things and writing Samo for Prez. And my nickname kind of became Samo for Prez. And so it was like, and everything I did was that kind of neo-expressionist style. But that's what really excited me about art and how I could express myself in this way with spray paint and oil sticks and things I never even thought to use in art. And I mean, that was my big intro for sure. And I copied everything. It didn't look just like it, but you could tell, oh, he likes Basquiat.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's important you got to start somewhere, right? I mean, but one of the things that you mentioned to me was, or that you just said that really landed was just how one thing leads to another, right? So maybe that film was what led you to, looking into Schnabel's
100%.
artwork, right? And I think it's important to, if there's probably a few different takeaways from today, but that's one of the things that I think is really important to emphasize is the value of chasing your curiosity and just going where those rabbit holes lead, because one thing leads to the next thing, leads to the next thing. And, there's never been a better time to be omnivorous in your consumption of different influences, right? Like, YouTube's pretty damn good at guessing as to, when you look at one thing, there's like, you know what? I didn't know I wanted to see that, but I actually did. And thank you very much.
And Instagram is terrible at it.
As good as YouTube is, that's about how bad Instagram is. That's very, very true. But just chase those rabbit holes, and chase down, where it might, because it may be the original thing that you stick with that becomes a major influence, but it may be the third, fourth, fifth, 17th thing down the line that actually ends up being, a more significant, long-term, influence. Right?
Yeah. And here's a quote that I love by Jean-Luc Godard. It's not where you take things from, it's where you take them to. Ooh. Right? And I love that.
Run that back. I want to hear that again.
So it's not where you take things from, it's where you take them to. Mm-hmm. Because, I look at so much art, man. I look at so much art and I read about so much art every day, and I'm taking bits and pieces with me from every section that I read off. And what do? I spend 4, 5, 6, 8 hours in the studio every day painting. And I've got this collection of ideas and techniques and how people use medium and how they created, why they did this, what size, what scale, what material. Like I've got all these things in there that I'm grabbing and taking, and oh my gosh, paper on canvas, on paper, let's cardboard. But it's not about like who I'm taking it from. It's like, where am I going with it? And over time, the goal is it becomes you. But you're also furthering the ripple of water of what was created before, and you're taking it in places that maybe could have never gone before. Another quote I love by Gary Panter says, and it goes with this one, if you have one person you're influenced by, everyone will say you're the next whoever. But if you rip off 100 people, everyone will say you're original.
Yeah. Well, and that's so important too. Actually, I got two things. I may be able to hold on to both of them. I may not. All right. I don't want to forget this. So what your previous quote, as far as, where you take things to, talk about how every significant movement, with very few exceptions, came from a group of artists who spent a lot of time together, who spent time in each other's studios, who would show one another their work and would respond to, right? So talk more about that.
Yeah, I mean, go back and read art history and you'll find those groups, right? You've got, I'll just go to the Impressionists, Manet, Monet, Degas, Bernadette, all around each other's studios, all seeing each other's work, and all influenced the direction of Impressionism, which I think we've talked about in a past podcast. But most people don't know that Bernadette, the female, was one of the largest influences on that group of men, right? And it's like the things she started doing in painting, they saw, they loved, they stole her ideas. You know what I mean? Because they're all in each other's studios every day. Wow, look at that. Let's do this. I'll do this. Now they got credit for it. She's starting to get credit for it today, but they got the most credit for it. They're the most notable, but it influenced what changed art at that time. You know, you fast forward even to the surrealists get together and they create their own manifesto. If you're going to create surrealism, you must sign on the dotted line and it must follow these things, right? You got the Dadaists, you got this group of artists, you've got, you know, the abstract expressionists from New York that all hung out together and spent time together and influenced each other. And you can read so many artists from the 20s, from Joe Miro and all the guys around him. We're like, we're just trying to be Picasso. Like we were all trying to be Picasso. We copied everything he did for a while because we wanted to be like him. And it's funny that the history of art is shaped by these things and these movements, right? And it's a group of artists stealing ideas from each other, you know, and working together. And obviously there's ugliness that is a part of that as well, but it is how things become developed over time. But some of them have similarities in their work, but you can tell who is who as well. Yeah. Because all those ideas still came from them, and all they were taking, they continued to develop their own style out of these things they were taking and stealing from.
Well, and that's the other big thing that's worth discussing on this subject. There's only one you. There's only, I mean, again, when you're pulling in so many data points, so many different inputs, there's only one you that's going to process and express those influences, you know, a certain way.
Yep. Well,
I mean, it could only come from you at a certain point when you've looked to enough different sources.
Well, and the great educator and artist John Baldessari said, I think it's copying when you don't add anything to it.
Sure.
You know, and that's what you're saying, right? It's you're taking these ideas and you're developing your own style out of it. You know, we work on this a lot in my mentorship program. You know, as artists are like, what? I don't know what my voice is. I don't know where I am. Well, what do you love?
Yeah.
What work do you love? You know, and I have artists like, well, I don't know, but this is what I feel. This is the art that I'm drawn to. And it's like, well, maybe you're more of a minimalist than you are an abstract expressionist, because the thoughts and the things you're telling me fit more under minimalist ideas and things than really heavy, thick, abstract expressionist ideas. And that artist will go and then study minimalism and go, wow, yes and no. Right? I do feel this, but I also want to express deep opinions and things. Maybe I'm a abstract minimalist, right? And you kind of create your own, you know, where you're going and what you're doing. You know, I've got another artist in a program right now who, you know, is dealing with studying trauma and neuroscience, things like that. And she's kind of developing her own terms for what she is in her art and what she creates. And we're looking at all these other artists and influences and practicing the things that they do to turn them into your ideas and into your practice, if that makes sense.
Well, it totally does. Yeah. And one of the things that I definitely learned from my time in the program with you was how, and this has come up a lot. I suspect it probably will a lot going forward as well, but just that whole idea of being, getting permission, you know, to do, because, hey, so-and-so did it.
Yeah.
Right. Like, why, you know, now I'm not claiming to be as good as whatever artist I might be citing, but the fact that they did it gives me permission to do it as well, and to try it and to integrate it into everything else that I'm taking in. Right.
Well, yeah.
Good.
And I mean, you know, we say this all the time. There's no no's in art.
Yeah.
If you have the idea, if you like something, go do it. Don't Don't wait for somebody to say there's a right way and a wrong way. Now, on a material basis, there's a right way and a wrong way. Yep. Certain materials don't go with certain materials. Oils, acrylics, there's a right way to use it. There's a right way to, you know what I mean? So it's like materials is different, but as far as ideas, what you want to create, how you want to create it, there are no no's. And if you spend time studying art, you will realize there are no no's. So, you know, you've got a lot of crazy conceptual things that happen out there that you can argue isn't art, is art, whatever, but they're not taking no for an answer. They are creating what they feel like they should create and putting it out into the world. And it's either accepted or it's not, but they're putting it out there, and the boldness that comes along with that is a whole nother conversation for another episode.
I'm going to throw another quote out that kind of pertains to that. This is by Chris Do, who is, are you familiar with him, by the way? He's a great follow on YouTube and Instagram. He gives a lot of, he's a designer and filmmaker, but he gives a lot of like really tactical input on how to market, how to sell, how to just talk about your work and be properly compensated for it. So, a lot of really good gems. I recommend following him. But he said, this is a recent quote I think I pulled from Instagram, but he said, everything's a remix. To make something new, copy, combine, and transform. Copy, combine, and transform something old into something new. Say or show something old in a new way. And I think this kind of speaks to the value of not just diversifying your influences within, you know, the art space, for example, but also looking like inspiration is everywhere. Yep. I mean, when your radar is up, like it's all over, whatever you're into, there's something in there.
Yeah.
Probably a whole bunch of things that you can, you know, sprinkle in. Maybe it's obvious, maybe it appears, or maybe it's just something that because you're taking in new things, because you're a student of life in general and just absorbing a diverse set of information and influences, it's going to affect you positively, right? So It's funny, as I'm reading that just now, I'm thinking about like music and, you know, what, you know, when hip hop started to sample, you know, different things from previous, you know, eras, from the 60s and the 70s specifically, like that became the hook and that became a thing. And taking something totally old, not totally old, but something from whatever generations previous and giving it a brand new spin, which in some cases is, you know, much better known than the original, you know, source material, right?
Yeah.
But that's because, again, back to the Tarantino reference, because, you know, those artists were consuming a bunch of different work. I want to stick with music because, you know, you and I are both big fans of music, but I don't have a specific reference here, but you think about the number of times that you hear one of your favorite artists when they're asked who their influences are, and they'll say some obvious ones where you're like, oh yeah, I totally hear that. But then you'll also hear somebody like, what? Like, that's totally, you can't hear that in their sound at all. And I guess my point is the things that as visual artists, the things that we take in, it may or may not express itself, you know, in the work, but that doesn't mean that the influence isn't there, right? Yep. And because we're taking those things in, it's giving us a deeper well to kind of draw from.
Yeah. I mean, I think Jimmy Page is a great example of that. I think he talks about it in the documentary It Might Get Loud or something else. I watch a lot of documentaries, but they ask him, you know, what kind of music do you listen to? What rock bands? He's like, oh, I don't listen to rock. I don't listen to much music outside of classical or old barbershop, you know, type quartet type music and things. Yeah. And he would even say, obviously, we weren't a rock band. Led Zeppelin, we were more jazz, fusion. He didn't even listen to rock and roll. Didn't care for it.
Yeah.
Yep. You can't tell me that the classical music and the things he didn't listen to didn't influence the progressions and the timing and the things that they were doing at that time in music that was different than so many other people and still lasts today. On that, there's a quote by Marcel Duchamp, and he says, you think you are actually doing something entirely your own, and a year later, you look at it and you actually see the roots of where your art comes from without even knowing it all. So the artist who is doing their homework over time will prove they've done their homework, so to speak.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And there's plenty of quotes we could go into on if you're only working with your ideas, you're not going to go very far. But if you're working with a whole lot of everybody's ideas and you're doing your homework, your work has ultimate room for growth.
So I've definitely heard, just in conversation, I've definitely heard artists talk about how they genuinely believe that they have come up with something completely original. I don't know how many, I don't want to use the word famous, but successful, whatever, well-known artists, would claim that, but there's some, right? So I wonder, what's the case to be made for trying to insulate, going the opposite direction, right? The case for not copying, the case for really trying to genuinely just come up with something that is truly original. Is there a case to be made for that? Because we're both clearly on team copy and steal, right? So
Yeah, I mean,
let's talk about the other side of the coin.
I would say good luck.
Is there merit to that argument is my question.
I would say good luck, number one. I hope you do it, because that would be amazing. In my lifetime, to see somebody create something completely new and original would be fascinating to me.
Yeah.
But nobody's going to get there without copying. Like every single artist in history who's developed something new was copying somebody else at some point and stealing from somebody else at some point that helped them transition to where they went. You look at every facet of art history through time, post cave painter that created their colors from grounds and spit them on a wall. And I love when Jerry Saltz talks about the origins of art and the way things worked. But it's like post that time, it's steal and copy and then grow into your own. So every major movement in art, you look at those artists and then you look 5 years prior to them changing the face of art, they look like somebody else or one of their heroes' works, right? That's
Yep.
I mean, that's anything in life. That's music. That's playwriting. That's filmmaking. That's anything in the creative arts. That's dance, right? There's been constant forms and evolution in dance. And I think breakdancing, hip hop, stomp, like all these different new forms of dance that have started to show up on TV, show up in films and things where they haven't been recognized before. They're still coming from ancient forms of dance from African tribes, dance from throughout history that start to form cultural happenings and evolutions within it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we're going to get some pushback in the comments and responses to this. I would love to ask that anybody that has that wants to make a case for that. We're certainly interested in hearing it. Cite your sources. Like I'd love. I mean, we would love to hear. What would be your examples? Not just being opposed to the idea, but also supporting that with, some artists and creatives that have done that. We talk about how there's never been a better time, to educate yourself and to be influenced by, a number of different things. There's also never been an easier time for somebody to just steal stuff, like literally grab an image and repurpose it. Like, we're not pushing for that. Like, that's completely different than what we're talking about. Just as a full disclaimer, right? This is another quote that came up when I was, so speaking of rabbit holes, this is another quote that came up when I was looking for that Paul Schrader quote. Woody Allen. Well, I've stolen from the best. I mean, I've stolen from Bergman. I've stolen from Groucho. I've stolen from Chaplin. I've stolen from Keaton, from Martha Graham, from Fellini. I mean, I'm a shameless thief. But again, citing your sources and just owning it. Like, I've been influenced by a lot of different things.
I'm going to piggyback with another filmmaker since this is a quote heavy episode. This is from Jim Jarmusch, the great indie New York filmmaker who has been around the New York art scene for a long time with fine artists, visual artists, not just musicians and filmmakers. He says, nothing's original. Steal from anywhere that resonates with inspiration or fuels your imagination. Devour old films, new films, music, books, paintings, photographs, poems, dreams, random conversations, architecture, bridges, street signs, trees, clouds, bodies of water, light and shadows. Select only things to steal from that speak directly to your soul. If you do this, your work and theft will be authentic. Authenticity is invaluable. Originality is non-existent. And don't bother concealing your thievery. Celebrate it if you feel like it. In any case, always remember what Jean-Luc Godard said. It's not where you take things from, it's where you take them to.
Yeah, and that to me is just that really reinforces something that you said earlier, which is, cite your sources, honor, the nods and the homages, that you're making to other artists. And funny, I think, I was, interacting with somebody on Instagram recently, and he had some beautiful work, and I just commented on his, and he was a newer, younger artist, and I said, hey, that's beautiful. Like, I definitely see the, X influence in that. And he said, oh, someone just mentioned that to me, the other day. And I was like, really? So I have no reason not to believe them, but I think it's important to realize that some of the influences that we have are very conscious, but there's plenty of others you're soaking stuff up on a subconscious level regardless, right? So, might as well educate yourself and give proper recognition, to where those things are coming from.
Well, and I think we talked about just proving that you do your homework. Man, that stands out. I'm sorry, but the artist who goes to museums, goes to galleries on a regular basis, studies art, is just fascinated and endowed completely into art outside of their studio practice, not just in the studio practice, but outside, it shows. I mean, if I'm a curator and you put an uninformed artist next to an informed artist, and I have to choose which artist to do a solo exhibition with in my gallery or in my museum, and I go and meet with this artist and do a studio visit and talk about art and influence, the artist who can prove their homework, that can talk through these things, that can, and I'm not saying educated, right? I'm not saying school, like MFA, undergrad. You can self-educate and learn today as much as you can in an undergrad and MFA program. You just have to take the time to do it. So if I'm a curator and I'm in a space with the person and they're informed about their work and why they do it, how they do it, who they study, what artists have influenced, what they're doing, where they've come to, and the other artist who takes 5 minutes to just explain their work, I'm sorry, I'm going with the informed artist. I mean, and there's more to just being a studio artist if you want to be in the gallery world. There's more than just creating. There's also learning. There's also showing up as well. Trust me, it goes far.
Yeah, and that's something too, I think, where you have the ability to just get yourself in more conversations, right? Where you're contributing, but also
absolutely.
where you're absorbing and learning, and it opens up a dialogue. I wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing an example or two, because I know you have with me in other conversations, but where you've had a chance to open up some of those dialogues when you're at a museum, when you're at a gallery, and just where that's opened the door to have a new conversation and build a new relationship.
Well, my first solo exhibition in Charlotte, North Carolina, my mentor came out to the show, Mako Fujimura, Japanese-American abstract artist, brilliant. Definitely look him up, possibly read a few of his books as well, if you want to read. Came to the show, but we gave a lecture, a public lecture one day with a big curator from the North Carolina area who has been a curator at major museums, contemporary museums, brilliant woman. And, we walked the gallery together. And she asked tons of questions about my art, tons, archival questions, right? Every major curator from a museum is going to ask you archival questions. And why is your work archival? Why is it not? What are you using? Is that archival? Like things like that, right? But also, I see some influence here. Yes, this influence is coming from here. And she was doing it, right? She was not leading me. She was like, prove yourself. Those moments are going to happen in art. Like, you're going to have people that are going to just talk with you, and you have others who are going to come in and say, prove yourself. And so be prepared. And I luckily I was prepared. And so we were able to talk about these influences and how I've changed them and how they've adapted in my work. Why am I sewing? Why am I not using these things? What are the reasons for that? Not just story, but I'm bringing art history. But we gave a lecture the next day to the community. And I think because I was informed and able to talk about these things, it made that lecture a lot easier. Here I am with my mentor on the panel, right, who is a very educated artist who speaks all over the world about art and his work and how he creates and why he creates. And then this curator on the panel as well. And I was included in that conversation. I could actually answer and talk, and I could hold my own in conversation. And it's not because I'm some genius. It's because I study. I actually spend time in my studio studying work, going to museums, going to galleries, asking questions, talking to artists on Instagram or on Zoom or whatever, and just surrounding myself with art any minute I have. And I'm a nerd. I'm an art nerd, 100%. But it helps. It does help in those situations, career-wise.
Well, and that's a great case to be made for. So you talk about your mentor. That's a great case to be made for just proactively seeking out influences and getting yourself around people who know more than you, right? Like, I've been very open with you about part of my motivation for doing this with you is it's going to motivate me, to educate myself better, to learn more. And, you've been at this longer than I have. So I'm learning from you every conversation, that we have, right? So, that's, I think, a product of just being willing to ask the question of, hey, can we, whatever, ... interact more? Can I throw questions your way? I mean, I think that's part of the response. I don't know if I want to say responsibility. That might be a little bit too strong, but, of an artist or of a creative is to be aware. I keep using that. I keep coming back to that idea of having your radar up.
Right.
But to look for other, mentors, peers, I mean, whatever you want to call it, but just people in your life who are going to push you forward, who are going to motivate you, who are going to inspire you to, raise the bar and keep, moving things forward, right? And adding to the conversation as opposed to just, pulling from it.
I'm still growing. I mean, I haven't made it, right? I'm trying, like, that's my goal, whatever that looks like. I just want to be able to support myself and continue to grow and make art. And so I don't have all the answers. I'm still learning, all these things. And I think, man, there's another quote I was looking for here that I had that really kind of goes, oh yeah, don't worry about people stealing your ideas. If they're any good, you'll have to ram them down their throats anyways. Howard Aiken.
Who said that?
Howard Aiken.
So read that again. Yeah.
Don't worry about people stealing your ideas. If they're any good, you'll have to ram them down people's throats anyways. Howard Aiken. And the reason I'm saying that is because the reason I started my mentorship program, I believe apprenticeship, mentorship, the willing to give advice and help is a lost art today. And I think especially in the art world, it's something that used to exist for centuries, the apprentice, the master, the teacher, the student. And there's so much fear in the art world that artists are afraid to share ideas. Artists are afraid to say where their ideas come from. Artists are afraid to open up to the 15-year-old kid that loves your work and sends you an Instagram message. How did you do this? What materials did you use? Why do you do it? And they don't answer. I've kind of made a personal statement of, I'm not going to be that person. I'm going to be the person that answers the questions, that shares ideas, that's willing and that's open to teach and help others learn, because the art world's scary and everybody doesn't know where it's going and how it works. And it's constantly changing and adapting. And there's new rules, unwritten rules, and there's new things to do that happen all the time. Do something wrong, you do something right. You don't know, it changes overnight. Like, I guess I just made up a poem, an art poem. But it's like, who gives a shit if people steal your ideas? If your ideas are good, they're going to be stolen. Number one.
Yeah.
If your ideas are good, somebody's going to steal them. So that should be a confidence builder. Wow. I must have done something because a ton of people are starting to do this. But how do you really know people are going to steal your ideas, and how do you really know if it's good in the first place?
Well, to me, I'm sorry, keep going. I cut you off.
No, go for it. Go.
I got so excited. To me, that comes down to, are you thinking about things through the lens of abundance versus scarcity? Right?
Yeah.
Like, in other words, if you're worried about somebody copying your, whatever you got going on, you're probably in a static mode, right? Of like, this is kind of my thing. And that's fine. I mean, there's not to say anything, against that approach to art making, but I think that just more broadly, thinking about, if you approach your art, and I would argue, life as well, from an abundance mentality versus a scarcity mentality, it's a completely different paradigm in terms of how you think about things, right? Like, I always come back to some of the, recovery principles, that I've had to understand very well from a 12-step standpoint. But, one of the sayings in AA is, you can't keep it unless you give it away, right? Like, in other words, you sharing that, with that, 15-year-old kid, like that energizes you. I mean, even just you explaining that, I've had that, even as young as I am in this whole process, even that experience that I've had of, because I like to experiment with a lot of different, materials and processes, I get DMs about, how does this behave? And what is, even just having to explain that and answer those questions, it deepens my own understanding. It forces me to think about like, oh, how am I doing that? Or what is, so it's a reciprocating, sort of cycle that really it's fulfilling, right? To give, because let's be honest, if you're honest with yourself about where things are coming from anyway, you're really not claiming, complete ownership of any, it is just that sort of broad, collection of things that you've absorbed, over time. I think about, again, back to just diversifying influences, from all my time in the business world, there's a lot of different, writers and books that had I been on the artistic, full-time artist path, from the beginning, I never would have been exposed to. But one of those guys, authors, Tony Robbins. But one of my favorite Tony Robbins quotes is, success leaves clues. Success leaves clues. In other words, all right, this worked for somebody. Presumably at a high level, if you're aware of it. So what are the clues? What are the common denominators? And how can you connect some of those seemingly disparate concepts, in a novel and unique way? The only way you're going to be able to connect those dots is if you're freaking paying attention to what is working for other people, not just in the space that you're trying to be successful in, but broadly, right? Just interesting. What about that works, for that person? What about this thing over here? Could I apply to this thing that I'm doing over here? Because, I think the more random or the more out there, that connection might be, the more novel it's going to appear when you bring it to a different space. You think about food, for example, right? Like, I don't know when exactly I think you're more of a foodie than I am, but when the whole, trend of fusion came out, right? I don't know when that was, but maybe it's been around for a long time. It probably hasn't before it was even called that, right? But when we're combining, these different, ethnic cuisines and seasonings and things like that. Oh my gosh, when you combine A and B, now you get something that's completely unique, but that comes from absorbing, consuming a lot of different influences and paying attention to what about this works over there and what might I be able to apply over here.
Right. Well, and, to piggyback on your Robbins quote of success leaves clues, I'll also add that failure proves you're trying. And we were discussing this in the mentorship group this last Saturday. Sylvia Plath had a quote that said, all of my rejection letters proved to me I'm trying. And it's like, taking that a step further is like, if you're successful in becoming you through all your copy and your theft of things, like there will be clues of why you're being successful, right? All those things. But then also, you still, in order to get there, you got to put yourself out there. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And in the art world, there's a lot more failure than success. So thinking about Sylvia Plath, talking about her recognizing that she's trying by her rejection letters, right? So for her books, for her poetry, and putting them out there to publishers and constantly getting rejected, right? To her, that proves I'm doing something, I'm trying, and we talk about success leaving those clues, that failure. I mean, you have to put it out there. You have to try to fail first, right? To find some success, especially in, pretty much any of the arts. You're going to get a lot more no's than yeses most of the time. But a lot of artists don't even put stuff out there in a manner that they're going to get rejected or find success, and that's, we got to spend all that time finding us and everything else out there that we love and constantly putting those pieces together to form the work that we are confident enough in it being our work and not just copy of so much other work, right? And then we put it out there and see, how the audience, how the art world takes it. And sometimes it might be you got more work to do, and other times it might be, wow, this is fantastic and this fits and we're going to run with you. So don't let rejection spoil what you're doing in the studio and how you're pushing and learning and working. Like, don't let those, I experience it every month, I feel like, rejection for in some level in the art world. And it'd be very easy for me to get down on myself and not continue to study and not continue to copy and practice and grow in my work.
That brings up a whole other element of this, which is worth talking about. I didn't think about it till just now, but just, not just fear, or forgive me, not just rejection, but fear of rejection,
Sure.
or in the context of this conversation, fear of being called out for, being too derivative, or whatever term you might want to use, of copying or stealing, in the negative sense, right? Like,
Right.
that's a thing.
Sure.
That's certainly something that I've experienced, a lot, especially when I'm intentionally, exploring something that I've gotten picked up from another source. There is that fear of like, oh, well, and I think to your point earlier, I'll ask you too if there's anything you would add to this, but you said something to the effect of just making sure that we're citing our sources, that we're, being open about, like, yep, I'm influenced by this, and not trying to hide from it, but actually owning it and celebrating that. Did I understand that correctly from what you mentioned before, or in part one, probably?
Yeah, absolutely. Talking about like those things, I finished my first novel during the pandemic, and it took me 13 years to write, because I would stop and then I'd work on it again, and then I'd stop, I'd work on it again over the years. And my goal is art. So it'd definitely be interrupted with a lot of art making and then sitting down to write. There's tons of ideas within my novel that I've taken from other artists. My favorite writers, David Eggers, Nick Hornby, Merritt the Poet, Mary Oliver, and then fiction, my favorite fiction writers, and from my favorite filmmakers, from Wes Anderson, and from stories that I love, Charlie Kaufman, screenwriters and things. And, William Burroughs says all writing is facts just cut up. It's a collage of words that you've read or that are overheard. And so it's like, but when I wrote my query letter for publishers, I also have to put in this letter, what is this book like? What are the similarities? I cite my sources. I'm not going to hide from, I wanted to start writing books after I read High Fidelity by Nick Hornby. I want to write because of, and I'm taking all these ideas and facts and things I've gathered and the way other guys have written and the way that other gals have written, and I combine it into how I wrote. Same thing with art. But for me, it was just another new learning experience of that copy, that theft, that how to be great at something you do by taking the wealth of information that others have done before you and then finding your voice within that.
Totally. Yeah. That's a perfect segue into the one of the last quotes that I wanted to share. And this is one of my favorites that I just came across yesterday because I went down a rabbit hole because I was preparing for this conversation. So this is a quote by Paul Rand, the legendary designer, who said, "The artist is a collector of things, imaginary or real. He accumulates things with the same enthusiasm that a little boy stuffs his pockets. The scrap heap and the museum are embraced with equal curiosity. He takes snapshots, makes notes, and records impressions on tablecloths or newspapers, on backs of envelopes or matchbooks. Why one thing and not another is part of the mystery, but he is omnivorous." And there's a couple things from that based on what you just said and that I want to add as well. But to your point, like, you may or may not ever be it may or may not be your goal, I don't know, to be a, published, author, or to take, I don't know how far you want to take that. But I do know about you that, you've been involved in film, that you produced an award-winning documentary, that you're involved in writing. And I think that there's so much to be said for just trying different things, even if it's not going to be your thing, right? Like,
sure. I
think about just the completely random interest in things that where you can connect the dots. I think about how, my passion for, photography and videography, how that lends to my understanding of composition and understanding my exploration and my attempt at understanding composition and lighting, and things along those lines. But one hand always washes the other, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's impossible to sort of, separate out, oh, this is just, writing this is just writing tie. This is just filmmaking tie. This is just artist tie. Or even broadly, even beyond, in things that may or may not on the surface have anything to do with anything else. We're collecting, we're stuffing our pockets, whether it comes from the scrap heap or the museum, it doesn't even matter. And the thing I love about that is the very last word, omnivorous. In other words, I can take meat, I can take fruit, I can take vegetables, I can take any food, anything edible, and I can convert that into fuel. Yeah. Right.
Yep.
As opposed to, if you're limited to just, one specific food source, survival becomes a lot more difficult. So I love that idea of just being an omnivorous, consumer. And the part of this, as we kind of begin to wrap up and think about what we can do with this, or what might be the tactical application, to me is taking snapshots, making notes, recording impressions, capturing those things as they come along so that it's in the well, right?
Absolutely.
So there's a subconscious absorbing of just things that sort of wash over us and influence us without our necessarily seeking it out or thinking in those terms. But to me, this quote here is a reminder that it's also incumbent upon us as creatives, as artists, to be intentional about capturing those things, about writing those things down, about taking those pictures. And I've got random folders and notes and things it ain't organized.
Right.
I love it if it was, but they're there, and I'm sure I know you've had the experience of looking back at journals and capturing little things that were influencing you, years ago. I mean, I know, a current work is based on, poetry that you wrote, 20 years plus ago, 25 years ago, right? So anyway, so I think it's important for us to be aware of, we're going to absorb some things just naturally by consuming them, but we also need to be aware that there's a lot of value in proactively capturing those things and writing those things down.
Yep.
Your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, that's my life. That's what I do. So it's like, I mean, I've amassed books, photographs, pictures, folders on my desktop, folders in my desk drawer, journals, notebooks. I should probably invest in sticky notes because I've got thousands of these all over the place, and all my books are just lined with arrows and notes and note cards within books. And, my favorite thing about going to art museums is going to the art museum library if they have it. Some art museums have massive libraries of books. And I go through the museum, and then I go into the library and I grab and I make a stack on the table, and I have my phone out, and I'm just taking snapshots of everything that speaks to me, right? This collection of ideas. And we should be mental hoarders as artists. Yeah. I truly, truly believe that, because that influences our work. It informs how we talk and think and create and all these things. And I mean, that's all I do every day. I mean, I'm blessed to be able to do that. And it's taken me a long time to get to this point, to be able to hoard regularly ideas and art and consume these things in such a way that helps me create out of the chaos, which I have a quote I want to read about. Lewis Hyde, one of my favorite books, The Gift. I suggest every artist reads The Gift. And it talks about really kind of the history of art coming from a gift, like a tradable gift that was used in ancient history, to kind of commissioned work, right? Michelangelo and being hired as a trade things, and then to art as a commodity. And how to balance that art is truly still a gift, but yet it also is a commodity. And how do you balance that between the two? So I suggest everybody go out and buy that book. So this quote says, "Most artists are brought to their vocation when their own nascent gifts are awakened by the work of a master, an influence. That is to say, most artists are converted to art by art itself. Now, finding one's voice isn't just an emptying and purifying oneself of the words of others, but an adopting and embracing of filiations, communities, and discourses. Inspiration could be called inhaling the memory of an act never experienced. Invention, it must be humbly admitted, does not consist in creating out of the void, but out of chaos." So what he's saying at the end there, invention, the originality, the newness, the your voice that is your work and does no longer look just like other pieces of work. It looks like your work. It does not consist in creating out of the void, the just yourself, the just this. It comes out of the chaos, the hoarding, the collecting, the ravaging of thoughts and ideas from so many other things and other cultures and all of that is where invention comes from, not out of the void of just trying to do it alone and by yourself.
That's pretty deep.
Very
There's
deep.
a lot there.
A lot there.
Yeah.
Very deep.
That could be a whole,
Yeah.
We could have a number of spin-off episodes of just this topic alone. I suspect that we'll probably end up coming back to it.
Yeah.
And so at some point as well. I was trying to find, that actually made me think of another quote that I wanted to find specifically. There's so Scott Adams, who's responsible for most notably Dilbert, I don't know how long that cartoon has been going, but I remember him, I think it was on the Tim Ferriss podcast, but he talks about how he's not the best. I'm paraphrasing based on, again, my memory, but I'm not the best artist. There are way better, artists than me, or people draw much better cartoonists. I'm not the funniest. There's people who are way better at comedy and much funnier, but the combination, but I'm okay. I'm pretty good as an artist, and I'm pretty funny. And so it's the combination of those things, right? So it's kind of that Venn diagram of influences and life experiences too, where, I've kicked myself. I spent some time, in all the, 20 plus years that I spent, really in the business world and not really doing much of anything with art, and I did for a period of time have some regret, like, man, where could I be, had I just taken the more, traditional route to get to here. And I didn't spend too much time there because I quickly realized it all leads to this, right? All the Venn diagram, it's not just two circles, right? It's a number of different, things and experiences and influences, right? Like, I use a lot of, construction techniques and materials, in my work. I'm a shitty, tradesperson, right? Like, ain't nobody hiring me to do anything but, maybe haul some heavy stuff around. And even that window's probably past as I age here. But, but I know enough about like kind of how to use different materials and how to, use different, different techniques. That's just one example of many, but, to your example of your experience and your knowledge base as a writer, your experience and knowledge base, that you spent, in marketing and advertising and those types of things, right? Like, it all leads to wherever you're at today, and how you're going to filter. That's another great way that I like to think about it, how you're going to sort of, process the influences that you've received, in a new and novel, way. Yeah. The last quote that I wanted to share, unless something else comes to me, which is possible, but this is from, one of my favorite books, Catching the Big Fish, by David Lynch.
Who started out as a painter, right? An artist, and then worked, and then decided, whoa, I think film is where I can really tell my story. And he still creates, right? He still paints. There's a great documentary that's out about his life as an artist as well, and a painter. But as we were saying earlier, try lots of things and find where your art works, where your voice really can be used, right, with your art. And so I love David Lynch.
And that aesthetic is his sensibilities are. I'm going to take credit for recommending that book to you. I'm surprised that you hadn't already. But I highly recommend. Right? I think it's just the way he communicates. The audio version's fantastic as well because he reads it himself, and he's just so matter of fact about the way that he breaks down, really complex and sophisticated ideas. But so this is a quote from that book. This idea comes to you. You can see it, but to accomplish it, you need what I call a setup. For example, you may need a working shop or a working painting studio. You may need a working music studio or a computer room where you can write something. It's crucial to have a setup so that at any given moment, when you get an idea, you have the place and the tools to make it happen. If you don't have a setup, there are many times when you get the inspiration, the idea, but you have no tools, no place to put it together. And the idea just sits there and festers. Over time, it will go away. You didn't fulfill it, and that's just a heartache. All right, so I'm kind of dovetailing the previous quote of being omnivorous, of capturing different things, but then doing something, with it. And I think it's important to note that it doesn't really matter what you don't need a studio space.
Right.
You don't need, again, there's never been a better time to capture, ideas. We all have a freaking recording studio in our pocket that is more advanced and more powerful than what, would take up an entire, building from decades previous, right? Like there's never been a better time to capturing those things, right? Like catching it. You don't even need to develop it, right? Just catch that fish, catch that idea, put it somewhere where it's going to, have some, whether that's your idea or something, that you've copied or stolen from somebody else, but catch it, have it somewhere. Again, my system, and I'm using air quotes here for anybody who's just listening. I don't really have one, but I know I've got all of these, and even just with modern technology, I've got, I don't even know how many different folders on YouTube, for example, of different categories that I can listen back to. I've got, when I save things from Instagram, different journaling, all of those different, you capture those things, and then you've got this diverse collection of, back to that food, metaphor, you've got all the ingredients you could ever, and you continuously are collecting more and more ingredients to make your unique dish, so to speak.
Well, yeah, and it's important, and this is a whole other episode at some point, right? Just that taking the copy, the theft beyond, and really documenting who you are, why you're doing it, what are the things you want to do, holding on to those things and using them, that they come back and use them later. And work down the road, these ideas and things. Why did Basquiat mean so much to me at the time that it did? Why, when I see his work, does my soul move in such a way, you know what I mean, that other work doesn't do it? But writing about it and jotting those notes down about those things, and my discovery and love after I hated Impressionism for so long. Writing about why certain pieces move me the way they do. Why does Degas' ballerina pieces move me in the way they do? What is it about those things? What is it about the pastels? What is it about, so it's like, it's not just the ideas too, but write out what you're thinking and why you're thinking about these things. Cause I'm a big senses guy. Activating all of my senses, I feel like, enhances me as a person on a regular basis. If I'm just on the computer and on my phone all the time, and that's where all my senses are engaging, I feel like I'm going to die really soon mentally. That's why I still love to use pens and pencils and journals and paper and buy books and read books. And not that I'm not on my computer a lot or my phone, but I try to offset that with ordering magazines and reading, having my subscription to magazines and local art newsletters and touch, feel, listen, see. Like, I like engaging all those things because I do think it enhances everything. That's a whole other conversation for us as well. I think that would be a fun one, enacting all five senses.
It totally is. But from that, I think on today's topic of copying and stealing, that's a really interesting point that you make. That's worth acknowledging, is just the value of not just identifying and becoming aware of what moves you or what you like, but why do I like that? And I've heard you say before, not just, why do I like this, but why do I not like, certain things, and really unpacking, like, what is it about, the essence of the thing, that really captures me? Because when you get down to sort of the elemental nature of something, the likelihood of how you then express that is going to be a lot more unique to your own voice. And really thinking about, you just triggered another thought of, like, I've become obsessed lately with just trying to understand how. So I live in Minnesota. It was, whatever, -4 when I drove, to the studio this morning. But there's something that happens in cold weather states that use salt, for the ice on the roads, where as it evaporates, it just makes the most beautiful marks. And I posted a bunch of just like accidental artwork. And I'm just like, dang. But just thinking about, like, okay, I love that. It's gorgeous. why do I love that? And then what could I potentially do with that? So that led me down a whole nother rabbit hole of like, I got a bunch of different little science experiments laying around of, trying different types of table salt and kosher salt and road salt. Like, what is it going to take for me to maybe capture that and recreate not necessarily the exact look, but the essence, and that the sort of like literally elemental nature, of that thing.
And just to add to that, one of my former mentees, Christine Anderson, we talked about this a lot, right? With her work, as we looked at, what do you love? What do you love? What's the art that you love? What do you want to create? She goes, well, coming out of work as a contractor, I love the raw, undeveloped moments when a home is being built. The tar paper, the wood, the foundation, the rebar, right? This is what moves her. It's like these things, they're just, to me, there's beauty in there. I'm like, then why don't you make that? And she's like, what do you mean? And I said, why do you need permission to make that? If that's what you love, if that's what moves your soul, then go make art that moves your soul. Yeah. And she was like, oh my gosh. So that's what she's working on. And I mean, she's using those raw materials. Like, listen, Mark Bradford gives you permission to use those materials. The biggest artists in the world give you permission to do these things. And I'm like, man, I want to see you doing massive installations that look like unfinished homes that have your touch and your feel and your story as to why, and I can walk in it and move around. Do it. And that's the whole point, right, of what we're doing here with this podcast is we're finding quotes, we're gathering all this information and ideas from people that we love or have influenced us, and we're like, listen, all everybody's saying is just go make some damn art.
Yeah. As we wrap up, you may not like anything about this episode, but I'm confident that never before has this collection of quotes and ideas been shared in the same hour and change. So, for what it's worth, we do our best.
If you want to argue with us, bring it. We'd love to argue with you or debate it, but you can also go ahead and debate with some of the most known artists, writers, filmmakers, musicians, poets in the history of humankind, if you want, as well, because they all say,
if it's going to be a battle, we put some monoliths on the front lines ahead of us. So you can argue with us, but you're really arguing with these legends of history.
Find us on Instagram, Ty Nathan Clark, Nathan Terborg. We'd love to chat with you. Send us DMs, and we're looking forward to what we're going to bring you next time as well.
Thanks for joining us. Have a great one. Go make some art.
See you from not negative to weather.
Peace.